Intelligence accelerates error when it runs without internal constraint. Faster processing leads to faster conclusions. Strong reasoning skills construct persuasive explanations post hoc before uncertainty has time to register. The mind reaches coherence early and keeps moving. Incompetence amplifies this effect. When skill has produced reliable outcomes, confidence grows ahead of calibration. The gap between how certain a person feels and how accurate they are actually begins to widen. This isn't recklessness, it's efficiency applied to the wrong terrain.
Welcome to Beyond Success, the podcast for high achievers seeking deeper meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. Now, here's your host, world-renowned leadership coach and therapist, David Tian, PhD.
Hustle works, control works, grind works. These traits produce results. They compress time. They reward effort with visible progress. Careers rise because some people move faster than others. They push harder, bring order to chaos, and stay in motion when others hesitate. That pattern explains a great deal of success. Early on, being wrong carries a light cost. A misstep leads to a correction. A poor call becomes experience. The system absorbs mistakes and keeps moving. Speed earns approval, decisiveness signals competence, confidence attracts trust, and the feedback loop stays positive, and for a long stretch, it feels reliable. Then influence expands, stakes rise, decisions begin to compound, outcomes stop being reversible, authority grows even as the room gets quieter. And at that stage, errors behave differently. A single misjudgment can unwind years of credibility. A missed signal can fracture relationships that once held firm. Consequences arrive late, complete, and without a clear path back to the moment that they were set in motion. What makes this phase really difficult to recognize is how little changes on the surface. Dominance continues to receive praise. Clarity still draws applause. Speed still looks like leadership. The same habits keep producing visible wins. There's no signal that the terrain has changed. Meetings still end decisively, like metrics still move. Outcomes still look strong from the outside. The machinery appears intact. Meanwhile, something much more subtle erodes. Perception narrows. Sensitivity to context dulls. Signals that once informed judgment end up fading into the background. Decisions feel cleaner even as the picture grows smaller. By the time the cost becomes obvious, the habits behind it feel earned. They feel justified. They feel inseparable from identity. That's where this episode begins, because the real danger shows up when success continues to function while quietly degrading the judgment that once made it possible. I've got 5 points here, and this is the first. Success trains the mind in ways that rarely get examined while things are going well. The training starts early. Speed earns approval. Decisions made quickly get labeled as decisive. Hesitation attracts scrutiny. So over time, the pace stops being a tactic and starts feeling like a virtue. Certainty follows close behind. Clear answers travel further than careful ones. Confidence reads as leadership. A firm view becomes easier to defend than a nuanced one. Gradually, conviction begins to stand in for understanding. Ambiguity, meanwhile, develops a bad reputation. It slows momentum. It complicates plans. It introduces questions that have no immediate payoff. In competitive environments, unresolved complexity feels inefficient. The mind learns to move past it. Now, none of this requires conscious intent. It emerges from feedback. Behavior that produces wins just gets reinforced. Behavior that delays outcomes fades away. Under pressure, the pattern tightens. Information that supports the plan flows through easily, but information that complicates it creates drag. Data that demands reconsideration feels like resistance rather than insight. Emotional signals enter the picture here as well. Tension in the room, a sense of unease before a decision, subtle discomfort that lacks a clean explanation. In high-performance contexts, these cues register as interference. They get filtered out in favor of what appears solid or measurable. Intuition doesn't disappear, it changes posture. Instead of listening, it reacts. Instead of surveying the field, it moves to defend momentum. What once felt like sensitivity ends up turning into reflex. This pattern carries no moral weight. It doesn't require vanity or self-importance. It arises from repetition, from success achieved under constraint, from systems that reward fast closure and visible control. Each win reinforces the method that produced it. Each survival under pressure strengthens the same neural pathways in the brain. Over time, cognition adapts to the environment that it keeps winning in. From the inside, this adaptation feels like clarity. Decisions arrive faster, doubt recedes, the sense of friction drops. The mind experiences all of this as improvement. And from the outside, the results often justify that feeling. Targets get hit, teams move quickly, authority consolidates, the feedback loop stays intact, which raises an uncomfortable question. If this process consistently delivers success, what incentive would the mind have to challenge it? Why question a strategy that keeps working? Why slow down when speed keeps paying off? Why sit with ambiguity when certainty continues to deliver outcomes? There's no obvious reason to pause, no internal alarm, no external signal that invites reflection, no red flag. The system teaches the lesson thoroughly. Effectiveness becomes self-validating. Confidence feeds confidence. The absence of immediate failure reads as proof. That's why this pattern spreads so reliably among high achievers. It feels earned. It feels rational. It feels aligned with reality as it appears in the moment. The discomfort only emerges later, when the terrain has already changed. And by then, the habits are deeply embedded. Now, here's the next point. Power changes how the mind organizes reality. As authority grows, the world starts to simplify. Fewer variables demand attention. Fewer voices carry weight. The field of vision narrows to what appears most relevant to action. Complexity doesn't vanish. It gets compressed. Dashboards replace conversations. Metrics stand in for lived experience. Narratives substitute for messy contexts. Information arrives already filtered, already shaped to support movement rather than understanding. And this compression feels efficient. It reduces cognitive load. It allows decisions to land quickly. It makes large systems feel manageable. Anything that resists that frame quietly ends up getting pushed out. Signals that lack a clean category struggle to survive. Nuance that refuses to resolve into a number loses priority. Ambiguity drifts to the margins, where it attracts less attention and even less patience. And from the inside, this experience feels like progress. Decisions, again, arrive faster, stories sound cleaner, internal debate settles down, the mind moves through its environment with less friction and fewer interruptions. And there's a kind of relief in this. Mental effort drops, doubt recedes, the sense of command strengthens. And this is where the mechanism becomes difficult to notice. The mind under dominance doesn't experience confusion. It experiences clarity. It feels organized. It feels decisive. It feels aligned. The reduction in perception doesn't announce itself as a loss. It announces itself as focus. Faster decisions reinforce the sense of competence. Cleaner stories create coherence. Less internal friction reads as confidence. And each reinforces the next. And what goes unseen is the cost of that coherence. When the frame tightens, information outside it struggles to register. Early warnings lose volume. Subtle feedback arrives too late to shape action. Complexity waits until compression fails under strain. Because the system continues to respond, the narrowing remains invisible. Outcomes still materialize. Authority still holds. Results still look strong for now. The mind takes this all as confirmation. But perception has already changed shape. The range of what gets noticed has already shrunk. Sensitivity to weak signals has dulled. The ability to sense emerging problems before they become explicit has already weakened. And none of this feels like blindness. Instead, it feels like command. And that's what makes this pattern so persistent. The rewards stay immediate. The penalties arrive delayed. The feedback loop favors confidence over calibration. And as influence expands, the cost of missing information actually grows. The margin for error actually thins. Decisions carry longer shadows. The mind, trained by earlier success, keeps operating with the same tools. What once worked in simpler terrain now operates in denser systems. The same compression that enabled speed now hides risk. The same clarity that enabled action now conceals fragility. And this is how judgment degrades without announcing itself. Confidence continues to rise. Certainty feels earned. Movement stays decisive. Sensitivity, meanwhile, continues to drop. Confidence keeps rising even as sensitivity drops. And the next point is that long before psychology had language for cognition, Ancient Daoism had already paid very close attention to how systems behave under pressure. And this wasn't some mystical thing. It was observational. It came from watching rivers, governments, bodies, families, and markets over time. Patterns emerged. Certain forms of effort produce reliable consequences. And one of these patterns involved force. When force increases, feedback changes. The responses become distorted. The people and systems stop offering clean information. Instead, they begin to protect themselves. Control shows a very similar effect. The more tightly a system is managed, the less it reveals its true condition. What remains visible tends to be what the controller wants to see, or what feels safe to report. Sensitivity to context fades in the process. Subtle shifts matter less. Local knowledge loses status. Signals that arrive without authority get ignored. Taoism also noticed something else. Systems under heavy management eventually push back, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly. Resistance accumulates in places that escape attention until it can no longer be contained. Translated into modern cognitive language, this describes a breakdown in perception. When everything becomes an object to optimize, the system stops speaking in ways that can actually register. Every interaction gets filtered through targets, metrics, and narratives designed to support movement. Information still flows, it just simply changes shape. Signals that don't advance the plan struggle to survive. Feedback that requires patience or humility fails to land. Context that resists simplification loses airtime. And this doesn't feel like ignorance, it feels like efficiency. From the inside, the experience feels orderly. The inputs keep arriving cleanly, outputs look coherent, decisions line up with objectives. The system appears responsive because it continues to produce results for now. What disappears isn't the data, it's the signal. Early indicators fade first, like weak cues, discomfort without explanation, patterns that require time to interpret. These signals rely on quiet attention. They need space to be heard. Optimization removes that space. As control tightens, listening becomes secondary to execution. Attention narrows around what can be measured, compared, and justified. Anything that can't be defended quickly ends up becoming expendable. The system doesn't fall silent. It's the listener who grows louder. Internal dialogue ends up speeding up. Plans multiply. Interpretations solidify. The mind fills every pause with intention. There's little room left for the environment to speak on its own terms. Sometimes success comes with a hidden cost. You might have built a career, a business, or a life you thought you wanted, but inside, maybe you feel burned out or unfulfilled. Or maybe it shows up in your relationships with your partner, your family, or your team, where no matter how hard you try, the same painful patterns keep repeating. If this resonates, I've got something you might be interested in. It's a free 2-minute assessment that helps you uncover the number one block that's been holding you back in love, in leadership, or in life. And once you take it, you'll get a masterclass tailored specifically to your results, so you'll know exactly where to focus to move forward. It's quick, it's practical, and it can change the way you see yourself and your path ahead. Take the first step right now at dtphd.com/quiz. That's dtphd.com/quiz. Taoism treated this as a practical warning. Excess effort carries a cost. Excess control blinds the controller. Systems respond more honestly when approached with restraint. And this was never framed as like passivity. It was framed as accuracy. Accurate perception requires a certain quiet. It requires attention that doesn't rush to shape what it encounters. It requires a willingness to receive information that might complicate the plan. Under dominance, that willingness erodes. The system continues operating, like outcomes still appear, authority remains intact, but the quality of feedback deteriorates. Reality becomes harder to read even as control increases. And that's the operational insight. The system hasn't gone silent. The listener has become too loud. And when listening fails, judgment gets clouded. And the fourth point is that there's a comforting assumption that intelligence protects against major error. And that assumption feels reasonable. Smarter people process more information. They spot patterns faster. They learn quickly from experience. Over time, this builds confidence that sharp minds correct themselves. In complex environments, the opposite actually is what often happens. Intelligence accelerates error when it runs without internal constraint. Faster processing leads to faster conclusions. Strong reasoning skills construct persuasive explanations post hoc before uncertainty has time to register. The mind reaches coherence early and keeps moving. Incompetence amplifies this effect. When skill has produced reliable outcomes, confidence grows ahead of calibration. The gap between how certain a person feels and how accurate they are actually begins to widen. This isn't recklessness, it's efficiency applied to the wrong terrain. Later stage environments demand a different kind of capacity. They contain delayed consequences. They involve systems with memory. Small decisions echo forward in ways that resist prediction. In these conditions, adult development becomes the limiting factor. One requirement is the ability to hold ambiguity without rushing forward towards closure. This doesn't involve indecision. It involves staying present with incomplete information long enough for the true pattern to emerge. Another requirement is self-constraint. Speed remains available. The question becomes whether it gets used. Mature judgment includes the capacity to slow internal movement even when acceleration feels natural. And a third requirement involves internal governors. Decisions guided by values hold shape when pressure rises. External incentives might fluctuate, the targets might change, but internal standards remain stable enough to regulate action. Earlier stages of success train a different response. Decisiveness gets rewarded, clear answers attract trust, movement creates momentum, and the environment reinforces rapid closure and visible confidence. And that reinforcement works well in simpler systems, like feedback arrives quickly, errors reveal themselves early, corrections remain possible. But as complexity increases, the rules change. The systems grow opaque, the feedback is delayed, the consequences stack up, and the certainty becomes expensive. The same decisiveness that once created advantage now increases risk. Early closure locks in assumptions that actually deserve testing. Speed bypasses information that arrives slowly. Confidence suppresses signals that lack immediate clarity. And from the inside, this all feels consistent. The mind applies familiar tools to new terrain. Intelligence keeps delivering explanations. Competence keeps sustaining momentum. But the environment responds differently. Errors surface later. Damage accumulates quietly. Course correction requires more than technical skill. And this is where development matters. Development doesn't remove intelligence. It reorganizes it. It places reasoning inside a wider frame that includes restraint, patience, and value-based orientation. Without that reorganization, intelligence becomes brittle. It adapts quickly within a narrow range and then struggles outside it. The sharper the mind, the faster it outruns its own perception. And the paradox sits here. What created advantage early on becomes a liability when the rules change. The traits remain impressive, the results might still arrive, but the margin for error thins with each confident move. And that is how high ability ends up becoming high risk. And that risk rarely announces itself, remember, until judgment has already drifted. Now look, I totally get it. High performers often carry a quiet suspicion of emotion. Emotion feels unreliable. It feels imprecise. It feels like the kind of thing that interferes with clear thinking, especially under pressure. In environments that reward speed and control, emotional distance gets treated as maturity. But that assumption deserves scrutiny. The real risk lies in emotional blindness that presents itself as rationality. Decisions continue to arrive on time. Explanations still might seem coherent. Confidence might stay intact. What disappears is a stream of information that once informed judgment. Emotional signals belong to perception. They register changes before language catches up. They surface tension that has no metric yet. They flag misalignment long before outcomes make it obvious. And when these signals get filtered out, Decisions might feel cleaner. The picture might look simpler. Internal conflict might drop away. The mind experiences this maybe as progress, but what actually happens is subtraction. One key layer of data ends up leaving the room. Another sense stops reporting. The system keeps running with fewer inputs. Rational explanations grow more polished in this process. Arguments tighten. Stories sound convincing. The absence of emotional data creates the impression of objectivity. But this impression holds only until complexity asserts itself. Emotional cues often carry information that logic alone cannot access. Discomfort can signal risk before evidence becomes explicit. Unease can point to hidden assumptions. A sense of tension can reflect system strain long before metrics respond. When effectiveness trains the mind to override these cues, perception narrows even further. The decision maker relies on what can be justified quickly. Anything that lacks immediate explanation ends up losing standing. And from the inside, this might feel disciplined. The mind might stay focused. Attention remains on task. Execution moves forward without hesitation. Emotional distance might end up reading as strength. But over time, the cost accumulates. Judgment grows confident, while sensitivity declines. Decisions rest on partial information. The environment responds in ways that feel surprising only because early signals went unheard. This pattern repeats across domains. Technical brilliance paired with relational breakdown. Strategic clarity paired with cultural decay. Operational success paired with long-term fragility. Emotion was never the obstacle. Emotion carried information that required interpretation rather than suppression. It asked for attention rather than dismissal. And when that attention disappeared, perception lost range. Effectiveness continued to deliver results, and confidence stayed high and authority remained intact. Clarity, however, became an illusion. Unchecked effectiveness produces certainty, supported by incomplete perception. And that certainty feels solid. It moves quickly, it resists challenge, and it quietly distances judgment from reality. And this is why emotional awareness matters at the most advanced levels of responsibility. It doesn't soften decisions, it sharpens perception. Without it, rationality keeps moving while reality drifts out of view. Unchecked effectiveness doesn't create clarity. It creates certainty with inaccurate perception because the mind is too good at post-hoc rationalization. Most achievers sense this long before they actually admit it. There's a quiet awareness that appears between meetings, a brief hesitation before a decision, a moment where confidence arrives faster than understanding. It rarely announces itself clearly, and it gets overridden just as quickly. The pattern feels familiar because it's worked for a long time, and that familiarity makes it easy to move past the unease. Results still continue, authority still holds, and the machinery of success seems to stay intact. And the mind concludes that whatever discomfort appeared can be ignored. And this episode hasn't yet answered the harder question. It hasn't shown how judgment gets recalibrated once perception has narrowed. It hasn't explained yet how signal returns after being filtered out by speed and control. It hasn't unpacked why increasing pressure often deepens distortion rather than correcting it. Those questions matter because the instinctive response usually moves in the wrong direction. When clarity feels threatened, the reflex is to tighten control. When uncertainty grows, optimization accelerates. When outcomes feel fragile, certainty hardens. And each response feels sensible. Each response increases the very conditions that created the problem. More dashboards, more oversight, more decisive action, and less tolerance for pause. And this is where the trap closes. The tools that once delivered advantage intensify the distortion when applied to more complex terrain. Dominance simplifies reality further. Optimization compresses feedback. Certainty reduces the willingness to listen. And high achievers really struggle here because the corrective move feels like regression. Slowing down looks like loss of edge. Allowing ambiguity feels like weakness. Stepping back appears to surrender leverage. The next episodes will examine why that impression misleads so much. The next episodes will explore how optimization, dominance, and certainty amplify cognitive narrowing. I'll show you why restoring judgment requires a different relationship to control. I'll explain how signal returns only when attention changes shape. Stepping back doesn't mean disengagement. It changes the quality of engagement. It alters what becomes visible. It expands the range of information that can register. And that shift feels counterintuitive because it contradicts earlier conditioning. It asks for restraint where speed once paid off. It asks for listening where action once dominated. It asks for orientation rather than force. And this series will stay with that tension because the risk here doesn't show up as failure per se. Performance might remain impressive for a while. Outcomes might continue to come. Authority can stay intact. The danger isn't losing performance per se. The danger is trusting corrupted judgment.